Yeah, the Derby, oh my God. Yeah, we fished in the Derby for sure. And some trips, it'd be like a windstorm was predicted, but then you think, I got to fish because this is it for this year. One time we left before the storm hit so we could be at sea when the storm hit and fish through the opening and not be stuck in the harbor because you can't get out. So yeah, I fished the Derby a lot, all up and down, and the horrible weather, and guys getting injured, I'd stitch them up, and whatever it took to keep going. I had one guy gash his arm open. I'm going, well, I learned a baseball stitch in school, and I was putting these gloves together. I says, I'll stitch that sucker up. I know how to stitch. So I stitched it up, this baseball stitch. It looked a little crude, but it held his arm back together, and he put a bandage on it, and he went back to work.
We normally had 60 skates of gear on board before that when we were fishing more reasonable trips. But when it got down to 1 or 2 days, it was at one point we had 200 skates of gear on a 63-foot boat, and we bait them all up so we could have them all baited up in town so we didn't have to rebait when we're out there, because we wanted to just get as much gear out as we could and haul as fast as we could and have all hands on deck dressing the fish and getting them in the hole and icing them. And I remember a few times just being sick to my stomach because I'd hear it's going to blow southeast 45 with an outlook of 50, something like that. And we can't miss the opening because we only have a few short openings, and this is how we make our living. So I just remember really hating that.
I had gotten a letter from a lady who had lost 3 sons in one sinking, and pleading that I help resolve this safety problem that had been created from what they called the Derby years. The guys were going out in 48-hour openings. There was 3,500 boats in an opening between Dixon entrance to the Bering Sea, False Pass. And the area opened up all at the same time. The seasons were set in February for summer openings, spring openings. You didn't know if there was going to be a storm. Well, there's always a storm somewhere in the Gulf of Alaska, in the Bering Sea. And they were losing. We had 35 search and rescue attempts by the Coast Guard per opening. And immediately after implementation of our IFQ program, that had been reduced for the whole season, the 9-month period, down to 3 to 5.
He graduated from high school, and he wanted to go out and make money. So we said, okay, you can go out. So we get him all geared up. He goes out on the boat, and he is a very slight person, tall and slight. And a wave came, picked him up, and over he went. And I did not know this until later, but then all of a sudden a wave came and brought him back on board. And he was just soaking wet, and the guys in the crew, they just said, that's it, you can go down in your bunk, and that's it. It was terrifying because, you know, once you go overboard, it's not, you know, there's a hard time to get anybody back, you know, alive. You might bring back their body, but you won't bring them back alive. And then I would testify to this, that I did not want to lose a son like some women have lost their sons or their husbands or their, you know, fathers or whatever it is, because there was such a race for the fish.
My mother had a real tragic upbringing. Her original father drowned. In fact, he was running, and it's still fishing actively now, a vessel called the Grant, a halibut schooner. And in fact, my mother, I think when she was 12 years old, it might have been the year that he passed away or was washed overboard, she rode up on the Grant to Ketchikan with her father and took the steamer back. But he was lost on the Grant, and my grandmother remarried another fisherman, and the whole boat went down. So she lost her real father and her stepfather you know, to fishing. And then she married a fisherman. And then, of course, my older brother went into fishing, and I went into fishing, and so I'm sure my mother had a lot of sleepless nights, you know.
We went to the processors and the fleet in 1984, went to the North Pacific Council and said, here's our fleet, here are our processors, Icicle Seafoods, Sitka Sound Seafoods, Trident, you know, all these companies, and we can take this resource. And they said, no, you can't. We think you're bloating the numbers. Well, we probably were. So we made such a row and a stink of it at that meeting that it embarrassed the Japanese that were there. Well, their longline fleet was very sensitive to this because they were making a fortune off of blackcod back in Japan. And so they went to our own scientists, the U.S. scientists, and they says, are you sure they can't do it? Yeah, they can't do it. So they said, okay, we'll give you till the first week in October. And if you can't do it, then everything is ours. Well, the fleet took that up, and then the head of the fisheries department at the University of Washington, Dr. Bevan, made a public bet of $10 with me that the U.S. fleet wouldn't do it. That really irritated a lot of people. And the fleet went out and chewed on that quota. And on October 7th, the State Department issued an allocation to the Japanese, but the National Marine Fisheries said, sorry, it's all been caught. So on, I think it was October 7th, 1984, we ran the Japanese out of the blackcod fishery. And shortly after that, the price came up about $1 a pound.
You look at the Port of Seattle and the businesses that are around it, you know, the electronics businesses, hydraulic guys, engine companies, shipyards, you know, all of those guys are, you know, are dependent on the fishing industry. It's not as big an impact as it was years and years ago because the fleet has gone down, but even so, you know, fishing in general, if you look at all the draggers and the seiners and everybody else, I mean, it's fishing industry that built the port right down here, you know, built Fisherman's Terminal. That's what it was built for, and you know, all up and down the canal. There's been, you know, it's been the maritime industry that's supported all of it.
My dad was really, really good at keeping track of things. He was a navigator for the Coast Guard. And I mean, he was amazing up there. And he spent a lot of time working with me on this stuff. I don't need to use that anymore because of the stuff that you're talking about, the electronics that we have on the boat now. But I mean, I got to give those guys back their credit. They did things that most skippers couldn't even think about doing today. You know, they'd keep track of their gear and their position when you couldn't even see land. I mean, out on the edge. It's a pretty amazing feat when you really think about it. Back then, there was a lot more where boats would hit a rock or run up and stuff like that than there is today because of the improvements in the navigation. But those guys back then, you know, they really accomplished something. It's amazing what they could do with just a clock, a compass, and a sounder, basically.
Well, it's a memory. I probably should have been home, but when I first had the boat, my daughter was born when I was out fishing, and the way it worked out, I kind of had to be there. I was just starting to run the boat. I felt like I had to be there. It was right at the beginning of the season, and for about another week, I was calling in every day, and my wife was overdue with my daughter, and the crew was really behind it, and we were all, we had kind of a pool going. Was it a boy or a girl, and how much was he or she going to weigh? And everybody was out there writing it down. And I remember I got a call. I was at the roller pulling in some fish, and I got a call from Seward Fisheries, and I knew that they wouldn't be calling me unless I just had a child. So I ran in, and they told me, congratulations, you have an 8-pound, 6-ounce, or 9-pound, 6-ounce baby girl. And so everybody was cheering out on deck, and I was able to go home right after the trip and see her.
The guys used to ask me for a job. I said, someone has to die before there's any jobs on this boat. I hope it's not one of my relatives. Guys did die. They stayed till they died. So I thought I'd get off before that happened.
That's what John told me when he was breaking me in. He said, while you're fishing, there's going to be all kinds of drama. There'll be a lot of emotion, fights, and really tensions and all this stuff. He said, you get that boat full of fish. End of problem. You want to end any problem, John, you just fill this thing up. All that drama, once it's full and the trip's over, all that drama washes away. You head to town. Nothing feels better than that. That's the best feeling of fishing, is when you have the wind on the stern and a full boat. And that boat is as quiet as a graveyard. People are just sleeping soundly, just one man on wheel, and you just hear this quiet creaking. And the boats are really nice when they're full, nice and heavy, nice and stable. That's the best feeling of fishing. You come to town, you get this great rush, this is great. And then little by little that boat gets empty. And she comes back up out of the water again. And then the next day you wake up, you're looking at that empty boat, and you got to go fill her up again. That's the hard part, you know. Then the thing starts all over again, you know. So